follow. So if you're ready, take it away.
Absolutely. First and foremost, good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm Chris Portis, the Chief Judge for the Municipal Court of Atlanta. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by, on the end, Judge Christopher Ward, the Deputy Chief Judge for the court. To my left, the Court Administrator and Chief Clerk of Court, Rashida Davis. To my right, Judge Tierney Gundy, who is the presiding judge for the DUI cases. And on the very end, Judge Jadanya Baker, presiding judge for traffic. Present in the audience as well, I have present Judge Teresa Mann, who is also presiding judge for traffic, as well as school bus and false alarm. And joining us as well are the Deputy Court Administrator, Brandy Reeves, as well as the Deputy Chief Clerk, Ms. So Young Yoon. Beginning the presentation and moving forward, starting on the very first slide here. We're starting with the vision of the court, and the municipal court is to provide the highest level of service with efficiency and transparency to the citizens of Atlanta, and we are dedicated to upholding the principles of law, integrity, impartiality, and fairness. The mission of the court is to provide a neutral and responsive forum for the resolution of criminal and civil matters that preserves the rule of law and ensures due process to all defendants. The court strives to operate in a manner that is respectful, promotes dignity, public trust, and confidence in the judiciary. Moving forward, on the next slide is an organizational chart for the court. For the actual organization itself, the Chief Judge is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the court. That's a role that is conferred upon him or her by a majority consensus of all of the full-time judges. The person designated by charter to spearhead those day-to-day administrative operations is the Court Administrator and Chief Clerk. She also serves at the pleasure of a majority consensus of all of the full-time judges. Below her are her deputies that she's hired, and below each deputy are the respective 10 departments that make up the front office operations of the Municipal Court of Atlanta. Moving forward to the next slide is just what the court's breakdown as far as divisions for the judges. There you have on the left a photograph of the current bench of the Municipal Court of Atlanta to give you the opportunity to put faces with names, and to the right, the relative divisions that encapsulates most of the court matters that are heard in that section, from DUI to Restore Atlanta, which is the community court division, in custody first appearance, criminal and aggravated traffic offenses, housing and code, and the general traffic divisions. Moving through, and Mr. Vice Chair, point well taken, I'm going to roll through these items very fast because this is something that we present very regularly to the PSLA committee. First and foremost, looking at the year-to-date fiscal year 23 traffic case metrics. For the current fiscal year to date, there have been a total of 92,420 traffic cases filed. Of those, 87,000 closed, for a closure rate of 94%. Same thing for the criminal case that have been filed, 8,341, a total of 4,997 have been closed. That's a closure rate of 60%. Looking at the total traffic cases filed for the fiscal year, year over year, this is a representation of just comparatively, as we move out of the pandemic, what those graphics actually look like for the number of traffic cases that have been filed. Right now, the fiscal year has, for the most part, outperformed fiscal year 2022 and 2021, with the exception as we move into the spring. Those two previous years have outperformed 2023. Looking at the same type of metrics for the criminal cases that have been filed for this fiscal year, year-to-date, year-over-year, a similar type of comparison. The one standout here, in 2021 fiscal year, there were a outperformance as we moved into the first quarter of that particular year in comparison to fiscal years 23 and fiscal years 2022. Looking at the next slide, I always like to report on the number of failure to appears that have been recorded for the current fiscal year, year to date. There have been a total of 41,567 cases that have gone into FTA status, and looking for the same type of data for the number of FTAs closed, there have been a total of 12,000. See here, let me get. 12,726. Looking for the comparison of FTAs from the current fiscal year versus the most previous fiscal year, you'll see that this graphic for the most part tracks proportional to each other, but it's also tracking proportional to the number of cases filed as well. That is a fairly at least decent behavior as we look at why folks are FTA and what we can do about it on the court side. We at least like to see that those numbers track to the number of cases filed as opposed to some other type of event. Looking at the number of FTAs closed for fiscal year 2022 compared to fiscal year 2023, again, those numbers track very closely proportional based on the number of cases filed and FTAs. Beginning in January and February of this year, one of the things been mentioned at Public Safety was an increased focus on not only trying to get those cases closed, but also continuing our zero tolerance on FTAs with regards to license suspensions, which we began in spring of last year. Looking at the number of warrants that have been signed this fiscal year, year to date, there have been a total of 7,068 warrants that have been signed. And looking at the number of traffic cases filed versus bound over, this number is still tracking at what should be a seasonal average of less than 10%. So looking at the current fiscal year as we close out April, 6% of those cases have been bound over. Same type of metric and comparison for the criminal cases that have been filed versus bound over. At this point, as we close out this fiscal year up through the end of April, 3% of those have been bound over. Looking at the number of folks that have entered the building for this fiscal year, that total is 307,000 and an average of just short of 26,000 per month. And that takes us into the meat of the monies conversation, which I will turn over to the court administrator and chief clerk of court, Ms. Rashida Davis.
Good morning. We are discussing the statutory surcharge, the remitted funds to both the general fund and the state required surcharges in city ordinances. I just want to highlight a couple just to give a context of where these funds, where these monies go. The peace officers training and pension, those funds are for training law enforcement professionals, and it's also a supplemental pension funding for Georgia law enforcement. There also is a fund for the Crime Victims Emergency Fund. That is a limited financial supplement to victims of very serious crimes. We have both the Indigent Defense Fund and the Indigent Defense Application Fee that funds individuals who are not able to afford representation for their criminal offenses. Those funds are both state required funds. We have the drug abuse treatment and crime lab fees. Those, of course, supplement individuals who are dealing with drug challenges, and then the crime lab fees help supplement funding to do testing for some of the evidence. Now, there's a driver's education training fund. This fund was actually amended this last General Assembly year. They have increased the calculation for that fund. That's for rehabilitative services for teens. And then some of the ones that impact here locally for the city, of course, are the Municipal Victim Witness Fund. That goes directly to our Atlanta Victim Witness Department that is overseen by Director Wright. And lastly, we have the Department of Corrections City Jail Fund. So for the calendar year of 2022, we have added those different sums in the last column, and then you're able to see a 5-year total for all the different funds. In addition to the surcharge, of course, we have the judge-issued fines. That would be the total remission amount, and so that is the, if I could turn your attention to the second chart, we just wanted to provide a 5-year overview of what those remitted funds look like. So for the last 5-year period, just a little bit under $97 million was remitted to the city. Next slide refers to our budget. We are primarily a personnel-funded based department, so the majority of our funds are for personnel. We have a 4-year kind of snapshot of our operating budget. For the most part, it remained fairly flat except for this year, and we are receiving an increase for funding. They have, there's been some adjustments to the extra help fund. We have kind of right-sided some of the personnel who should have been categorized in real full-time equivalent positions. So overall, it'll be a $1.4 million increase. Right now, we have 147 staff members on site full-time. There are 38 vacant positions. Our current headcount or available position count for this fiscal year was 185. That will be increased to 187. I believe those positions are tied to some of the retired APD personnel who provide security for the court. There were a couple of those positions that were tied to active APD numbers, position codes, and so they have corrected that and made that adjustment in the personnel paper. So just a minor adjustment in the total head count. The increase in salary, of course, helped to supplement the COLA increase that some of our personnel and staff received, as well as remaining competitive for job openings that we have. We are a 6-day-a-week operation, and this adjustment will help us compensate for the scheduling that we have for 6 days a week. The next box to the right is our operating budget. There's a small portion of our budget for purchase and contracted services. That is for our case management system, our integrations, our computer equipment, printing, mailings, and so that has remained flat. There is no marketable increase in that amount. The next slide is just a breakdown of exactly where the money for our budget goes. Personnel, pension, and other personnel costs is the majority, and then we have the other buckets of purchase and contract services with supplies. Our FY24 priorities are primarily focused on our staff, our team, our personnel. We want to fill the vacant positions and, of course, increase salaries commensurate with their responsibilities and their workload. We also want to remain competitive. We have looked at other counties and municipalities to determine what folks are being paid for the type of work that we are asking them to do. And so we want to make sure that we remain both competitive and retain our talented staff. The second priority would be technology. We have been working closely with AIM to update our website. We want to make sure that it has the most up-to-date information for the court cases, and there's certain documents that we want to make sure that people have access to and available online. The next pillar for our personnel would be training. We have been working very closely with APD on active shooter on-site training. We are involved in basically a 3-part training. The first part involved training with our officers on site and the local zone to do a physical training at our building to make sure that everybody is familiar with their roles should an event occur. And I think in this climate, of course, it is very helpful knowing that we've already begun that training. The next piece will be for our day-to-day staff, and then hopefully with the last, a real full-out active shooter training with everybody involved. We also want to do some de-escalation training to help bring down temperaments and deal with our clients and our citizens, customer service training, and business professional training. And the last priority for us would be grant funding to help fund some of our alternative sentences programs. Thank you for your time and attention. That concludes that portion of our presentation.
Thank you for your concise report, Mr. Hillis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Shook. Thank you, Chief Judge, for your presentation and your team. First question is on the surcharge page. See, the highest is to the GSP motorcycle unit. Is that surcharge specific to traffic tickets that that unit issues?
Specific to traffic tickets that the Department of Public Safety itself issues only? No, it is specific to any traffic ticket concerning a Title 40 offense.
Okay. So even if APD issues a ticket, that GSP?
State's got to get their money out of it.
Gotcha.
That's a good question, though. So when you look at case reporting, you'll see that the cases have different designations. The traffic cases will be TR cases, the criminal cases, CR, for instance. The breakdown or the surcharges that are applicable are different for those case types. So someone paying a criminal fine, for instance, will have a different breakout of surcharges versus someone who's paying a run-of-the-mill speeding ticket, if that kind of helps also. But no, without a question, we submit the money to the general fund, to the city. The finance department here at City Hall then remits to the state of Georgia its buckets of money as requested.
And then similarly, the crime lab fee, is that for the state crime lab or APD's crime lab?
That is also a state surcharge.
Gotcha. Next question is in regards to the operating budget and salaries. I believe I did a calculation, about a 27% increase, $2.1 million, and I believe it was explained by the court administration provided in the slides that appears to be most of this is you're adding 40 funded FTEs, and I'm sure some raises are in there for court employees as well. But where are those 40 FTEs? Is there a majority of, is it court administration? I mean, what are the 40 FTEs that were previously unfunded that are getting funded?
That's actually another good question. When the numbers are actually really dissolved, a big portion of the increase actually is money that went to increase existing salaries. We did an exercise of looking at what our folks were actually making, and we did a comparison. As the court administrator referenced, we were losing folks to other places because our salaries were $35,000 in 2021. So some of this money is being added in just to keep us even with some of the salaries that we've had to increase. I don't know that in reality, as we actually get into filling the roster to a full, if it's going to really translate into 40 individuals, because right now as we sit here, we are at about 150 people on the roster, and we are at budget capacity as it is now. So in reality, this is going to probably give us the capacity to get to the possibly 160, 165 number in the best case.
Okay, we'll get into more of that when we have HR here discussing the personnel paper, to dive a little deeper into that.
Where those folks are going, these are all frontline people. So we are trying to recruit to hire and fill positions both in the clerk's office and in the finance office. These are the people on the front lines that you see as soon as you walk into the court. They're the ones who take the fines that people pay every day, as well as reconcile these numbers to do the remittances. These are individuals who take in all of the filings, as well as the team that actually inputs the tickets manually into the case management system so that court can actually happen. That is what these are for. We increased the data entry team that actually physically takes a handwritten ticket and types that into the system for 150,000 cases. We increased that team to 14 a couple of months ago. Retention has us at close to about 10.
Understood. And we've had this conversation before, and I asked the question of APD when they were up here. So what in your budget, since we're on these pay increases, does this address your need to bolster the pay for GCIC techs and recruiting of more of those to fill those positions in your partnership with APD?
We actually don't have a shortage of GCIC techs. We are fully staffed, or as close to fully staffed right now on the warrants team to perform all of the duties that are traditionally court-based duties. The team as it exists today has also taken on that extra responsibility of placing up those warrants that we can place up, that 140 number, and they're able to get those packets over to the APD unit by 11 a.m. every day. So on our end, we're not really in a situation where we're needing to fill those roles. The folks in the warrants department did get, as a part of some of the salary readjustments that we did on the court side to keep them competitive, got some increasing, but we're not in a dire situation as far as the bodies, at least on the court side. Once the APD side kind of retains and hires its folks, we'll be ready to pass off that responsibility, and hopefully that will mean that there will also be a greater capacity of being able to accept warrants from the court.
And how many people are on that team?
Right now, I want to say that the warrant team is 14.
14.
Yeah, those, and you know, that's a part of those folks usually get in about 5 a.m. Those people who make up that team, they are not only the warrants department, but they are also responsible for coordinating and clearing warrants. If we have to take in an individual who is out of jurisdiction, comes in for an Atlanta traffic ticket, there's a hit out of Lawrenceville, out of Douglas County, they perform that work. They are also the ones who work with the pretrial team to run criminal histories to make them available for the in-custody calendar every day. So they also do more than just the GCIC piece. Even in the lack of the ability for the APD team to take the warrants from the court, the warrants team on the court side still performs all of the functions that they're required to perform as if APD would be taking those warrants, because we are also subject to audit annually by the GBI. We have to perform those steps if we're going to be a GBI certified court operation.
All right, thank you for that, Chief Judge Portis, and thank you for other judges and your team, and that's all I have, Mr. Vice Chair.
Ms. Overstreet.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation today and explaining the purpose of your increase request. I just want you all to know that I support your increase, all 1 million plus. We can't expect us to ask for all of these things that are happening around the city to go well and not expect for you all to get what you need in order to support that whole effort. So just wanted to put that on the record, let you know that I support you, and thank you very much for the presentation and the work that you're doing, especially the way that you're looking into the future and changing your technology and whatever else you all need, you let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lewis.
I wanted to second that. To understand the work that you all are doing, I had to go over and sit down. So I appreciate you all for inviting me over, Judge, for inviting me actually over to sit down and see the work that you're doing, and to understand you need a little ink. Not more, I think you're actually conservative on it. I think that the mayor was a little conservative on his budget this year. I know it's the largest budget in the city of Atlanta history, but we have more people living here now than we ever have in the history of the city. And so it's a small impact. And so I think that it should be more. I think at least another $500,000. I think it was that conservative. So I approve. I stand with you on that. I look forward to sitting down with you again in court to see, after we get this funding, to see the improvements of the court, to see how it's moving. I had another question on the clerks. I know that I remember there was a conversation over at the county building on the Fulton County Commission about us sharing clerks and us having one clerk. Does that affect us any way?
That was a conversation about the county commission looking at whether or not they wanted to consolidate the clerk's offices of the Fulton County court system. Now, that did not concern your city court, but I can explain to you what that is just so you know. In Fulton County, which is not a different situation than most of the larger counties, you have several different courts. You have a superior court, you have a state court, you have a magistrate court, and you also have a probate court. As we sit here today, each one of those courts have separate clerk's offices that services each one of the courts respectfully. The proposal or the study that will be taken up by the commission would look at, as far as I'm understanding, whether or not they should combine all of those services under one clerk's office, in this instance, which would be the clerk of the Superior Court. The case filing volume, for instance, in the county is not as high as it is in your court, at least per case. I think that you would also be very shocked with the number of papers that are filed in your county clerk's office, your city clerk's office over at the court. But it is a very complex operation on the Superior Court side because they do some business there that we don't do here in the city. They maintain, for instance, the property records in addition to case business as well in the court. So that's what that's talking about. That's not something that would concern the clerk of court for the city of Atlanta.
I appreciate you for your thorough response on that as well. Always crossing all the T's, down all the I's like we want our judges to. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Others? I understand the increase. I do need to be reminded of something. In FY22 to FY23, your line for supplies took a big hit. And then for this year, it's projected to stay where it was last year. Can you just remind us as to why that change was made?
I believe there were certain savings that were able to be realized in that fiscal year for one of our integrations, but moving forward, if that line items remains flat, I think that puts us in a good position. But there were several technologies that allowed us to have a cost savings that year.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anyone have anything else? If not, we're going to release you on your own recognizance. Always a pleasure to have you in our chamber.
Thank you very much.
And Public Defender, you are up.